Hello. Up until the last session, I introduced over 2 episodes, inheritance planning, wills, and trusts in relation to the 5th element of a happy life, financial dignity. Today, I will talk about how much money is needed for a child with a disability to achieve financial dignity. To do this, we first need to calculate the monthly living expenses. First of all, the largest portion of living expenses is likely to be housing costs. There are mainly 2 types of housing costs. One is when you own a home, and the other is when you rent. Even if you live with someone else, each person will have their own share of expenses. So here we'll calculate the costs on a per-person basis. Of course, it varies by region, but as of April 2025, the monthly rent for a 1-bedroom condo in the Vancouver area is about $2,000. If you own a home, you don't have to pay rent, so your monthly expenses will decrease by the amount of the rent. However, even if you own a home, if you have a mortgage, you'll still have housing expenses similar to rent until the loan is fully paid off. In fact, if your child with a disability lives in a group home or a home share, there usually won't be separate housing costs. And if they are living in a rental arrangement with living support, the cost can be covered by government funding and contributions from the support person living with them, so the expenses will generally be much lower than typical rent. In fact, if you have enough funds for a down payment, owning a home would be better than renting. For more information on this topic, we have covered various options under the title Buying a Home in episode 63 of our BoTV series, so please refer to that video for further details. We assume that the housing issue has been resolved in some form, and excluding housing costs, I considered how much the remaining living expenses would need to be for financial dignity. Everyone may have different standards when it comes to financial dignity, but as of April 2025, I believe that a monthly living expense of about $3,000 would be sufficient to achieve financial dignity. Looking at the major categories, I've estimated about $1,000 per month for food and dining out, $500 for clothing and household items, another $500 for transportation and utility costs, and about $1,000 for sufficient cultural and leisure activities. So the remaining question is whether our child with a disability can actually have an income of $3,000 per month. Now I will explain how to secure the funds necessary for financial dignity. For the sake of discussion, let me first make a few assumptions. First, let's assume that the parents had their child with a disability at the age of 30. And let's assume that the parents pass away at the age of 80. In that case, the child with a disability would be 50 years old at that time. Let's also assume that the child with a disability passes away at the age of 80. That means the child with a disability will need financial support for about 30 years, from age 50 to 80. Another assumption is that the parents enroll in an RDSP at the age of 35. In that case, the child with a disability would be enrolled in the RDSP at the age of 5. Let's also assume that the minimum contribution required to receive the maximum government grant, $1,500 per year, is made for 20 years. That would mean a total contribution of $30,000 over 20 years. And based on this, if you add up both the government grant and the bond, the government will match a total of $90,000. And let's assume the annual return on investment is 5%. I'll show you a table in a moment, but if withdrawals begin at age 50, that is 45 years later, the withdrawal amount would be about $740,000. If you withdraw after 30 years, that is when your child is 35 years old, the amount would be about $356,000. I'll show you this in a table in just a moment as well. And if you withdraw the amount monthly in the form of an annuity, at age 82, you could withdraw about $100,000 per year, which is nearly $9,000 per month. Fifth, the parents leave an inheritance and place it in a trust. The amount is assumed to be about $360,000, which is based on the assumption that the disabled child receives $1,000 per month from the trust for 30 years, from age 50 to 80. Another scenario is that the parents take out a $500,000 life insurance policy at age 35. And when the disabled child turns 50, that is, assuming the parents pass away at age 80, the $500,000 insurance payout will be deposited into the trust at that time. Now, based on these assumptions, I have created a table showing the monthly income amount for the disabled child. There is an amount called the PWD benefit, which is the disability support payment. And although it is not being paid out, yet there is the Canada Disability Benefit, which is scheduled to provide $200 per month starting from July 2025. The third item is the RDSP, which I mentioned a little earlier. Next, another item is estate, which refers to inheritance. And the fifth is life insurance proceeds. And sixth, if your child works, there will be employment income. I've written it as earned income in English, and I've categorized the possible scenarios based on the child's age at 19, at 35, and at 50. 19 is the age when government disability support payments begin. The reason I chose 35 is to estimate the amount that can be withdrawn from the RDSP 30 years later, so I set it at age 35. Next, the reason for setting it at 50 is, as I mentioned earlier, to calculate the amount the child would receive after the parents have passed away and the child is left alone. That's why I created the table this way. First, when you turn 19, the current disability support amount is $1,535. Then, starting from July 2025, an additional $200 will be added. So, after age 19, you will receive $1,135. And if your child with a disability starts working at age 19 and earns about $1,265 per month, this would ensure a total monthly income of $3,000. The reason I wrote $1,265 here is because that's the monthly amount. So, if you convert it to an annual figure, it comes to about $15,180 per year. Since the threshold for reducing disability benefits is $16,200, even if you earn $15,180 a year, it does not affect the disability benefits at all. That's why I'm saying that if you earn this kind of employment income at age 19, a monthly income of $3,000 is possible. Now let me explain, assuming that the criteria for finding RDS is 30 years from now. That is, when your child is 35 years old. That's an age when the parents could still be alive. At that point, you would receive about $1,213 per month from the RDSP. So, with these three items, the total exceeds $3,000. As I mentioned earlier, there is also employment income of about $1,200. Then from age 35, the monthly income would be around $4,400. Now, when they turn 50 and start receiving $1,870 from the RDSP, these three items alone would amount to $3,600. Now let's assume they receive about $1,000 per month from an inheritance. And if they also receive $500,000 from a life insurance payout and take it as an annuity, that would be about $1,388 per month. So when you add up these five items, it comes to nearly $6,000. If you add employment income to this, the total income would exceed $7,000. So at around age 50, you would be receiving more income than almost anyone else. Now the key point here is the RDSP. So let me explain a bit more about the RDSP with a few additional assumptions. The assumptions for the RDSP are the same as I mentioned a little earlier. We assume that the RDSP is opened in 2025, the parents are 35 years old, the child with a disability is 5 years old, and the annual investment return rate is set at 5%. All of these remain the same. However, here I have divided the annual contribution amount into 4 different cases. The first case is the amount I explained a little earlier. This involves contributing $1,500 per year for 20 years for a total contribution of $30,000. The second case is contributing about $300 per month, which over 20 years amounts to a total contribution of $72,000. The third case is contributing about $500 per month to the RDSP, which over 20 years totals $120,000. The fourth case is the scenario where you can receive the maximum RDSP amount if the parents have the funds available. When opening the RDSP, they would contribute $170,000 at the outset. Then, by contributing $125,000 per month for 20 years, after that, this adds up to $30,000, so in total, it becomes $200,000. This $200,000 is the maximum amount. that can be contributed to an RDSP, regardless of how much you contribute. The total government grant and bond matching will be $90,000. So based on this assumption, I am showing you a table that summarizes the calculated amounts for these 4 cases. As you can see here, the cases are labeled as 1, 2, 3, and 4. For personal contributions, the monthly deposit amounts are $125, $300, $500, and $125 respectively. Then, if you look at the total column, in case 1 it's $30,000, in case 2 it's $72,000, in case 3 it's $120,000, and in case 4, an initial deposit of $170,000 is made, followed by monthly deposits of $125,000, totaling $30,000. So the total assumed amount is $200,000. And now, if you look at the withdrawal section, it shows the case of withdrawing at age 50. The reason I'm showing the amount at age 82 is because when you use the RDSP calculator website, it calculates and displays the final amount at age 82. So that's what I'm showing you right now. Next, if you look here, for each case it says nominal. And below that, there's a line that says with percent inflation. In other words, the nominal amount and the real amount, adjusted by assuming this percentage of inflation, are both listed here. So, $100 now won't be the same as $100 50 or 70 years from now, so when you convert it to present value, how much would it be? That's what the real amount with percent inflation represents here. So what I mentioned at the very beginning is exactly this first case. So if you start withdrawing at age 50, here what's written as LDAP refers to the form of withdrawing as an annuity. Then, in the first case, if you withdraw at age 50, you would receive $22,445 per year in nominal terms, which comes out to about $1,970 per month. When this is converted to real value, adjusted for 2% inflation, the total value becomes $297,176. On a yearly basis, that's about $9,000. And per month, it comes out to $752. So although the nominal value is $1,970, if you look at it in terms of real value at that time, it would be about $750. That's how you should think about it. In the second case, where you pay in $300 each time, to explain it in the same way, you would receive a nominal value of $2,125 per month. And in terms of real value, it would be $1,015. Next, in the third case, where you pay in $500 each month, when you withdraw at age 50, the nominal value will be $3,273, and the real value will be $1,316. Then in the fourth case, where you pay in the full $200,000, when you withdraw at age 50, the nominal value will be $5,121. And assuming a 2% inflation rate, the real value will be $2,381. Next to that, you can see the amount you can withdraw at age 82, highlighted in yellow. As you can see here, the amount is much larger than when you withdraw at age 50. Since this is the final amount you can withdraw, you can see that the real value is also much greater. In this way, I have once again illustrated the real income of a child with a disability based on real value, as I mentioned earlier. Again, everything else remains the same, only the amount for the RDSP has changed a bit. That's because it's expressed in real value, not nominal value. Then why is everything else still the same? That's because programs like PWD or the Canada Disability Benefit are designed to account for inflation to some extent and will continue to increase in the future. So even if we leave them as they are, we can consider them to be in real value. So when your child turns 35, even in real value, just the first 3 items combined amount to about $2,300, and if there is earned income, the total your child would receive from age 35 would be about $3,568. And if your child turns 50, the total of the first 3 items, including the RDSP, would be $2,187. If you add the $1,000 per month from inheritance and the $1,388 per month from life insurance, the total monthly amount received would be $4,875. If there is also employment income, the total monthly income would exceed $6,000. With this level of income, I believe our child with a disability would be able to achieve a certain degree of financial dignity. And actually, even if there is no inheritance or life insurance, it is still possible to receive around $2,500. That's just considering the actual value. So I think they would be able to live a life that is somewhat better than the bare minimum. As I've been explaining, I've gone over how this RDSP amount is calculated, but now I'll briefly introduce the RDSP calculator website. If you go to the RDSP calculator website, which is shown above as rdsp.com calculator, you'll see a section where you can enter information. So for example, when you sign up for the RDSP, how old is your child with a disability? And when are you enrolling in the RDSP? You fill out all these kinds of details. For example, I entered 5 years old and 2025. Then on the next page, it asks how much you plan to contribute each year. Here I wrote $3,600, which means contributing $300 per month. And then it asks until when you plan to make contributions. Since we set it for 20 years, it means we will contribute from age 5 to 24, and the assumed investment return rate is 0% as written here. And now you're going to contribute to Rum Island. In this case, I selected no. If you do want to, you click yes and enter, say, $170,000 there. And that would be the fourth case we talked about earlier. Next, when will you start making withdrawals? If you enter age 50 there, it will calculate accordingly. So, when you click the calculate button, here, this is the kind of chart that appears at first. Here, the green section represents the investment returns. Then, the small blue section shows the amount we contribute. So just by looking at this chart, you can quickly see both the matching amount and how much is from your own investment. If you look here, you can see the value of the RDSP listed out, but to see this in more detail, you can click on the Show button next to the print icon, which looks like an Excel table. Then, as shown here, you can see from 2025 how much the grant is, how much the bond is, how much the annual contribution is, and the total amount when you add them up. Then, taking into account the percentage inflation, you can see what the adjusted amount is, how much the investment gain is, and finally, how much the annual payment from the RDSP, which I mentioned earlier as a pension type payment, will be. So if you look here, you can see that contributions are made up until age 24, and after that, there are no more contributions. Also, since there are no pension payments during this period, the pension payment amount is shown as 0 here. Then if you look at the next page, you can see that in 2044, when the person turns 24, there is a final contribution of $3,600. From age 25, the contribution amount is shown as 0. And if we assume that we will withdraw this money at age 50, then if you keep going through the pages, you'll see the year 2070, which is when the person turns 50. If you look all the way to the right, in the second to last column, it shows $33,000. And this is the amount of pension you can receive per year. If you divide this by 12 months, you'll get the monthly amount you can receive. And if you move 2 columns to the left, the $402,132 shown at age 50 is the real value, taking inflation into account. The $999,947 listed next to it is the nominal amount you would receive. In other words, if you contribute $300 each month for 20 years, the amount your disabled child can withdraw at age 50 is nearly $1 million. That's what this means. If you go to the RDSP calculator yourself and try calculating this with various scenarios, you'll be able to see how it would work out in your own situation. So, in conclusion, even if you don't have any inheritance, just by enrolling in the RDSP at a minimum, I've shown that your child can have an income of about $3,000 when they turn 50. In addition, if inheritance or life insurance is added on top of this, your disabled child will be able to live a more comfortable life by that much more. Additionally, one more thing I'd like to mention is that according to experts who strongly recommend this investment, rather than spending too much money on education, If you instead save a little and contribute an extra $100 or $200 a month to the RDSP, your child will be able to receive a much larger RDSP amount when they get older. Let me emphasize once again that no matter how much you receive from the RDSP, it will not affect your eligibility for the Disability Support Program at all. I want to stress the importance of the RDSP once more. All right, that's all for today. Next time I'll be back with another topic. Thank you for watching.